Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about training with chains, why I'm doing it, because a lot of people are getting questions, a lot of people are commenting on it because they see me doing this stuff every week. I use a lot of chain, a lot of band work, and I use a lot of straight weight, and I want people to understand that this isn't trendy, it's not gimmicky, it's not something new. When you start messing with bizarre stuff like weird combinations, that's trendy and new. In other words, if you do a reverse band board press or a reverse band slingshot press, that's trendy. Bands and chains are extremely mainstream in strength and conditioning circles. Most serious strength and conditioning gyms, whether they cater to field athletes like football players, whether they cater to power lifters, all have chains and bands. All right, it's a perfectly normal, everyday part of serious strength training for elite athletes. It's actually mainstream at this point, and it has been for a long time. It's not just been in the last few years. So hopefully people understand that. This isn't trendy. It's not new. It's not my creation. It wasn't created by anybody who's on YouTube. So let's come over to the point. What is it we're doing with chains? Because bands are a different animal. Chains are used to increase strength. They're used to increase accommodating resistance. And what we do is that we create a strength curve using chains that more simulates your strength curve and tension on different muscles. And this is working off of essentially increasing mechanical tension. Now, we could argue that there can be an explosive element to it in the sense that you're dealing with a different deceleration curve at the top of a lot of lifts. And there is truth to that, but chains are actually not the best tool for doing that. They can be helpful. They're better than straight weight, but they're not the best tool for that. What we are doing is that we are creating contrast weight, or also called accommodating resistance, in which normally if you're doing a deadlift or a bench or any other classic lift with a barbell, the weight is easier at the top than the bottom. Now, some people say, well, I fail at the top. Yeah, because you expended all your energy at the bottom, meaning there's more mechanical tension on the muscle at the bottom. That's the hardest part of the lift. It's the hardest part of the lift. And because joint angle specificity only carries over, if you were to train the hardest part too light and use so much chain tension that you only train, say, the top, you might not gain the strength that you need in the bottom position as much. You could actually lose strength if you're not careful. So what is it that we're doing? Well, by rotating in chains of different degrees, we allow for more tension on the muscles through different parts of the lift. All right, we allow for more tension on the muscles. And I'll give you guys an example. Take the bench press, for example, which I'll do some of in here also with speed work. With the bench press, you have more tension on the pecs and to some extent more tension on the triceps at the very bottom. As you drive it up, the weight stays the same and the tension on the muscles is reduced. Now, those muscle fibers still get worked because you have muscle fibers through different parts of a lift that are only recruited through certain ranges of motion, and then you have muscle fibers running the length of that muscle that can be variable. They can work through different parts. Right? They can work through the entire range of motion at any point in there. So it depends on where the fibers are placed all through the muscle, how they're dispersed. But there are fibers that are specific to certain joint angles or certain joint angle ranges. And so what ends up happening is that unless you're fatiguing the ones through the bottom enough, they get all of the work to fatigue enough to allow the range of motion specific ones to take all of the load and get fatigued through the other parts of the range of motion. By using chains, we can adjust that. We can make the actual tension higher through the entirety of the exercise. In other words, if you have 80 pounds of chains on a bar and you're bench pressing, the lockout suddenly becomes harder. And it's not just a lockout, it's every time you add a new link, which can be every couple of inches, a new link is added, a new weight is added all the way up. We are putting more tension back on the target muscles that due to mechanical leverages have less tension on the muscle through those different parts. So therefore we are hitting a variety of different muscle fibers. Now, is it to say that this should replace all of it? Should we do everything with chains? No. And a lot of machine makers realized this early on, and they tried to mess with cams and everything else to get different strength curves to accommodate this. But the truth is, it's very obvious that no big exercise puts the same tension on any muscle all the way through. It can't. It can't put the same tension. So what we are doing is that we're more evenly dispersing that tension. Now, the downside will be, let's say that you can do 200 for 5 reps with a normal barbell. Well, if you do that and you try to do that 5 reps with 200 plus 50 pounds of change, you're not going to be able to get all 5 reps. So in theory, we could argue the very bottom of the range of motion may not get trained as much because you won't be able to do 5 reps. It won't be able to be subjected to that 5 times. So if you wanted to stay in the 5 rep range, you might have to reduce it slightly. You might have to go down to 180 with 50 pounds or 60 pounds of chain. But if we're still within the basic range of enough to recruit those fibers, we're still getting them at the bottom, right? We're still getting them. But we just can't be too far from our reps in reserve where we would be. And conversely, because we're fatiguing a lot of the fibers through the rest of it that would hit it, when we go to hit subsequent reps, those fibers that are specific to the bottom are still going to get worked harder than they might be. So there's a trade-off in terms of specific tension. Sometimes we might lose a small amount of specific tension at the point where the muscle normally gets the most tension, but we give better tension all the way through. And it just gives a different training effect. It gives a different training effect. And from a hypertrophic effect, in theory, if we have stagnated a bit, using straight weight, this gives us an exercise variation. And people need to remember that. People will talk about exercise variation. They'll talk about these things for injury prevention, more complete hypertrophy, because you're giving a slightly new novel training effect. You're working the muscle slightly differently. When you go to mess with chains or different chain tensions, you're doing the same thing. You are doing an entirely new exercise that actually works slightly different parts of the muscle preferentially. It's no different than someone who does 2 sorts of chest presses. So let that sink in. Unless you plan on doing the same 5 or 6 exercises exclusively for your whole life with training minimalism, and you can build a base that way, but as you get more advanced, you become more injury prone. It can interfere with development. And this is one of the reasons that a lot of people who utilize this sort of method, you guys ever notice that when you go to the powerlifting circles, and this is an anecdote, that the powerlifting circles that tend to use these sort of methods tend to be bigger? Anyone ever think that through? Because again, there is enough exercise variation that we're hitting parts of the same muscles that may not be worked completely. We're getting fibers that may not always be getting worked using a lot of the straight weight. So therefore, we've got a potential for more hypertrophy. Furthermore, we tend to get rid of our sticking points, right? We tend to lose any sort of sticking points where we slow down on a lot of the lifts where we start chaining with this sort of stuff, because we have now hypertrophied and strengthened a lot of the muscle fibers that are specific to those ranges of motion. And it doesn't mean our weak point still isn't most likely off the bottom, because that's always where the most tension is, but you can also come in and do other exercises for that. So when you start thinking in terms of exercise variation, training with chains allows you to just work the muscles a little bit differently. But here's the upside. When you use something like chains, you maintain your specificity of training. It allows you to add an exercise variation, just like throwing in a new lift, to work a muscle differently or more completely, or to hit certain lagging parts of the muscles involved that wouldn't otherwise be trained. But you're maintaining your specificity of training. Because if you come in and you do a bench press with chains, you're still doing a bench press. It's the same movement pattern. You're getting the same movement pattern from a neuromuscular efficiency perspective that has a different amount of specific tension on the muscles from a hypertrophic perspective. Well, the end product is that we have more strength potential, and we have more potential for novel training stress while maintaining the neuromuscular efficiency and maintaining the motor patterns. Right, that's a big deal. So, I mean, people who wanted to do training minimalism, if someone says, hey, I want to work with training minimalism, and because they want to stay really good at their basic movements, using things like chains allows for additional hypertrophy by, again, addressing possible weaknesses in the tension curve and certain muscle fibers that might be lacking while still maintaining the movement patterns because it's the same exercise. So it's just something for people to think about who are utilizing this. Does that mean that a bunch of novice lifters need to be doing a bunch of chain work? Probably not. They're not going to be able to figure out how to do it correctly. But it remains a valuable tool. It remains a valuable tool for changing your strength curves. And obviously bands are their own animal, and I'll probably cover bands separately again with this because, again, they have completely different uses. They're not the same thing. It's not just about strength. That changes your whole speed curve also and your eccentric loading. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.